This is a toast from Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin said, "In wine there is truth, in beer there is freedom, and in water there's bacteria." Middle-aged Catholics missing in action. James Hillman, who's one of my favorite philosophers, James Hillman always says, "A symptom suffers most when it doesn't know where it belongs." That's the importance of proper naming. You have a backache sometime, you're not sure what it is, and you have dark scenarios, maybe it's a growth or cancer. You see your doctor and he says, "It's arthritis." It's not a good diagnosis. Beats cancer. You know what it is. Or David Tracy, 14 years ago, wrote a very fine book, and one of Tracy's more readable books called On Naming the Present Moment. It's a philosophical essay, very, very brilliant. Basically, just the importance of naming something. And there's a lot of, to my mind, sloppy kind of naming that goes on in both liberal and conservative circles. And so tonight, I'm going to try my own thing. Basically, I want to try to name a lot of stuff in terms of middle-aged Catholics missing in action, where we might go with this thing. Missing in action. And I've subtitled it, Our Emptying and Graying Churches. Simply start with an image. I was ordained as a very young priest, 25 years old, and for the first 18 years of my priesthood, I worked in the Archdiocese of Edmonton, Canada. Wonderful place. Okay. And I remember as a 26-year-old priest going to my first Chrism Mass there. And the cathedral was packed and vibrant and so on. This was in 1974, and people and so on. About 3 years ago, I was there for the Chrism Mass, which was 36 years later, and you know something? All the same people were in that cathedral. Except we're all 36 years older, and our kids aren't going to church, and we're all gray-haired. And there's even some of those 30 that aren't there anymore. Our emptying and graying churches. And that's characterized, I want to name these things, by 6 things, okay? And some of these is important to name them accurately. First of all, by a phenomenon that a lot of sociologists of religion called believing but not belonging. We believe but don't belong. I want to give you, and these, I took statistics from the United States, the Pew Study and so on, Canada from Bibby's work, and then stuff from Western Europe, and I've melted these statistics into one set because they essentially work the same other than church attendance. But listen to this. In Western culture that we're dealing with, some good news at the top. 90% of people on census forms still say they believe in God. It's pretty high. So atheism isn't a big problem. 90% of people, and that hasn't changed much since 1950. Okay? Secondly, 85% of people claim some kind of religious affiliation. And of the 15% who don't, it's interesting, of those 15% who don't, the vast majority are between the ages of 18 and 35, which will tell you something, because those are the ages where we feel immortal. And, we haven't had to raise our own kids yet and so on. Okay, so far so good, okay? Now, the big drop comes next, and that's why it's important to name this. The drop is not so much when people use the expression, as we'll see later, like post-Christian. It's post-ecclesial. The drop comes in church attendance. So notice you have 85% of the population claims religious affiliation. Then you jump to the United States, which has double the number of any other. You're the least secularized of all secularized cultures by a long shot, not just by a little shot. Okay, where you still, but even there, notice it's a 50% drop off. So it drops to about 40 or 43% of Americans who practice regularly. I come from Canada. It's 20 to 25%. In Europe, Western Europe, it's about 10 to 15%. But notice where the drop is. It's to do with ecclesiology more so than with belief in God and in Jesus. Which leads to the second thing, spirituality without ecclesiology. So, the common sense expression say, I'm spiritual, but I don't go to church. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Okay. Thirdly, a reductionistic perception on both sides of the ideological spectrum. I read liberal literature, I read conservative literature, and I find that it's not that there isn't truth in there, but I find that both are reductionistic, which means that you got some of the truth, but it's way too simplistic a truth. So in conservative circles, there's the belief that the church today is basically healthy. Okay, And it's meant to morph into something that's lean. I've added the word mean. They leave the word out, orthodoxically pure community, and that the culture is post-Christian, is morally corrupt, and is the enemy of this kind of a church. In many ways, that's for a good number of people, that's a conservative thesis. And what conservatives will look at, I'll pick on the liberals in a second, they'll look at what's still vibrant in the church. Give you your own diocese here. San Antonio, when Archbishop Gomez gave us once at priest stage, he said, I got good news and bad news. He said, the good news is, because we count heads in churches every October, he said, the good news is, in San Antonio, 150,000 Roman Catholics worship regularly. It's good news. The bad news is that's out of 1.5 million Catholics. Do the math. That's way below. That means 1 in 10 Roman Catholics in San Antonio is worshiping regularly, But if you look at that 10%, we have vibrant churches. We're building bigger churches, and it looks really good. Remember one time in a conversation with Archbishop Gomez, and he said to me, he says, he doesn't mind my saying this, he said, I don't really like your writings. He said, you're metaphoric, you're all over the place. He said, no, you're far too smart to ever get trapped in heresy. He said, but one of those vague metaphors, he said, why do you write like that? He said, that people want today is clear catecheses. Partly he's right. I said, I'll tell you why I write like that, because I'm an oblate. I'm a missionary. I went to World Youth Days when they were held in Toronto. 1 million kids came out, wonderfully enthusiastic, colorful spandex, and had that love affair with John Paul. And that was wonderful. And they're there, and the bishops are instructing him. But as an oblate, I was very conscious that there were 50 million kids who weren't there. And as Bill said, sometimes today we go after the 1 and we leave the 99, but if we look at the 1, it's strong. There are powerful, strong parts of Christian church today. But as we already know, that ex-Roman Catholics are the second largest denomination in this country. Okay, now that's the conservatives with the lean, orthodoxically pure. The liberal perception is that anger at abuse and patriarchy is the major root of our problem. And I live in liberal circles, and you get that all the time. And you get it in good expressions. For instance, and I don't want to accuse American Magazine of being a liberal magazine, but just the very last issue, and I have it here, very interesting. See, American Magazine, and I think there's some real value in that, but they have this guy, Byron, who had written an article, William Byron, who said we should be doing exit interviews. He said if any company was losing customers the way the Catholic Church is losing people, they would be doing exit interviews to see why are people leaving. Okay, and I think there's a lot of value to that. So anyway, American Magazine got stacks of letters on this. And this last issue, just February 28th, they published some of these letters, and they're very interesting. But of those letters, almost every letter is out of this liberal perspective, to say it's the sexual abuse crisis, it's patriarchy, it's the bishops, it's not an open system, and so on. Okay, see, and again, with both the liberals and conservatives, there's some truth in that. But notice I've used the word, it's a reductionistic perspective. Okay, then, fourthly, and very importantly, sociologists of religion who study this, they will tell you that the exodus of Catholics, or of any Christians from their churches, is more fueled by indifference than by anger. And that caught me by surprise. I remember first hearing that statistic from Reginald Bibby, and if you worked in theological schools and theological circles and circles of ministry, everybody's mad about something, and so you get the impression that everybody's angry out there, but in fact it's not true. Reginald Bibby says if you poll Christians, not just Roman Catholics, who no longer go to church regularly, he said, what percentage do you think are angry at their churches? That's why they're not going. He said, less than 5%. So the other 95%, they're sleeping on Sunday, they're shopping, they're going to football matches, they're doing it. It's not on their radar screen, Now, most of us move in circles where the anger is very evident, on both sides of the spectrum. So we can lose perspective on that. But at least numbers will suggest that indifference is the bigger issue. Then fifthly, middle-aged Catholics turning in huge numbers to other churches and other faiths and privatized spirituality. That characterizes this. So, like I said, ex-Roman Catholics is already the second largest denomination in the United States. And then lastly, just to name this, notice this suggests that it's more accurate to use the word post-ecclesial than post-Christian. It's interesting, Benedict, before he became Pope, was using the expression a lot, post-Christian Western Europe. He's more careful in his terminology now. But it's not so much, notice, not so much we're post-Christian by these numbers, we're post-ecclesial, that the struggle today is not with Jesus, or particularly with Christian morality, the Christian ethos, but it is with church going. There's a pretty clear parallel between the way people are treating their churches and the way they're treating their families. So people aren't leaving their families, but they don't want their families around a lot, you know. See, they aren't leaving their churches, they just aren't going to their churches. Now, some are actively leaving. In fact, in Ireland, there's a website now, a young woman has set up, you know, it's a website to instruct Catholics on how to leave the Roman Catholic Church, you know. But that's more by way of exception, you know. Most of you here, and, you know, I know in my own family, some of my nephews and nieces and so on, they haven't left the church, and they have the phone number in their pocket, and they're going to call it selectively, you know, for marriage, funerals, this, occasions, so on. They want the church, and they want the church to disappear. They've got my phone number there, you know, if they want to get married and want a church wedding or so on, but they're not going to use it very often, you know, and it's going to be the church on their terms, you know, when they want it. But that's also the way people today, by and large, the way we treat our families and our neighbors, you know. We want them around, but not that much, you know, and we want them around selectively. Now, that's missing. Now, why? The action. Okay. I'm going to give you the top 10 reasons, just like David Letterman, okay, being given by conservatives and liberals for why middle-aged Catholics are no longer going to church, or as I say, no longer gracing our churches regularly. And to be fair, I'm going to do 5 from each. But then I want to give you a series of other reasons that I think get to a deeper root, okay? So this is the conservative intuition. So in conservative circles, why aren't people going, why are Catholics not going to church? Number one, the church has lost its salt. Conservatives understand that there's been a diluting of classical Roman Catholicism in the wake of Vatican II and the social changes of the last 2 generations. So it's kind of like, people don't go to church because it's not worth going. The church has lost its salt. It's simply sold out. I've heard that from so many, not so much people even have left the church, but young conservatives inside the church. They just say, you know, we had a generation of building ugly churches and throwing everything away and diluting Catholicism and, you know, replacing Gregorian chant with bad guitar music, and no wonder nobody comes. Okay. Secondly, the ravages of secularity and moral relativism, a post-Christian culture, but very much focused oftentimes in 3 areas. The loss of a sense of reverence, the loss of clear dogmatic boundaries and symbols, and the loss of a proper sexual ethos. So conservative ecclesiology in its lament often focuses in on those 3 areas. The loss of the sense of reverence, the loss of like clear moral boundaries and religious symbols, and the loss of a proper sexual ethos. It's very much focused on that. I'll give you an example. I was just in Rome 2 weeks ago for an International Institute on Religious Life, put on by all the major superiors. And at one stage, they were talking about the struggle with vocations, you know. And one stage I said, you know what I don't understand? I said, I know some women religious in the United States, you know. I said, who are, if you wanted to order a sister from a catalog, you couldn't do better than that, you know. They're prayerful, they're deeply committed to the poor, they're living a radical gospel, and so on. And yet they're not getting young women to follow them. There was a young Dominican there from Germany. He said, are they wearing their veils? I said, no. He said, well, no wonder. You know, it's just that simple. Sister isn't wearing her veil. Well, how do you expect anybody's going to follow her? Okay. But I mean, okay, that's part of the conservative critique.